Hello guys, so it's me again. We're going to be going through the social approach today. I'm sorry if you can hear some kind of noise in the background. There are a couple more teachers in this room as well, but hopefully you can hear me nice and clearly. We're going to go through the social approach and we're going to be doing the same thing that we generally do, which is have a look at the studies together, how they link to their key theme, how they change our understanding of the key theme, and how they link to individual social and cultural diversity before we move on to the social area itself, look at the assumptions, how the studies link to the assumptions, and then the strengths and weaknesses of the approach. So you know how this works now. So we've got Google Meet as well. So if you've got any questions, you can ask me on there. If you want to pop in and out of Google Meet, you can do that as well. So if you don't have any questions you want to pop off, you can just kind of log on to Google Meet when you have questions yourself. But if you could all check in with me before the lesson ends, that would be great. Sorry about that, that's my bloody phone. So what we're going to do then is we're going to have a look at the social area. So the two studies in this area is Milgram and Bocchiaro. Milgram is the classical study and Bocchiaro is the contemporary or the more present study. And their key theme is responses to people in authority. So how do we respond to those in authority? And we know what authority figures are and who authority members are. It's people like teachers, experimenters, police officers, people that are in higher authority than us, our managers, etc., and so on. So how the core study links to the key theme, we've done this now so many times. We've done it for individual, biological, cognitive, and now we're doing it for social. So you should be getting used to this now. So how the core study links to the key theme, you've got to tell me how it links, give me evidence or results, and link back to the question. Now, what I've noticed on some of your guys' work from yesterday was that you weren't actually putting numerical results in the evidence when you were talking about the link to the approach rather than the key theme. But whenever I say example or evidence, it means I want you to put some sort of actual result in there, whether that be numerical or qualitative, but there needs to be some result in there. So we talk about Milgram first of all, and how Milgram links to the key theme of responses to people in authority. So we've got first of all the link, then the example, and then we've got kind of our link back to the question. So we've got Milgram's study links to the key theme responses to people in authority, as he looks at how people respond to an unethical and morally wrong situation at the hands of an authority figure in a white coat. For example, Milgram looked at how far people were willing to go to listen to authority and whether they would administer a 450-volt shock to a person for getting an answer wrong. Milgram found that most people responded to the authority with obedience, and he found that 65% of those participants go all the way to the maximum voltage. This shows that people will go to extreme length to obey authority, which is why Milgram's study links the key theme responses to people in authority. So you can see I've talked about why it links, an example, and then I have linked back to the question. Okay, and then what I'd like you guys to do is have a go for Bocchiaro now. So in your booklets you'll see it says now you try for Bocchiaro. Bocchiaro links the key theme of responses to people in authority as what did he actually look at? So he looked at people's responses to, what was it, a Dutch experimenter, stern looking Dutch experimenter in a white coat, and then him giving a very unethical situation, explaining an unethical situation to them, and telling them to write a letter to their students, fellow students, about how they should take part in a study. What did he find in relation to responses to people authority, and therefore how does this therefore link to responses to people in authority? So if you've got any questions about that one, do pop onto Google Meet and ask me, or if you want me to check over your answer, you can actually copy and paste it into Google Meet and I will tell you whether or not that is correct. So do have a go at that. So pause this video, have a go, and then play the video again and we move on. So the next is, does the contemporary study change our understanding of the key theme? Now, this is you explaining whether or not Milgram's study changes our understanding of authority in comparison to what we already know from, Bocchiaro's study. I apologise for that. Whether Bocchiaro's study changes our understanding about what we already know from Milgram's study. So does it change our understanding? Why? What did the contemporary study, so what did Bocchiaro find in relation to the key theme, give some evidence, compared to what Milgram found, the classical study, in relation to the key theme with evidence? So does it actually change our understanding? Milgram found that people were really, really obedient. Did Bocchiaro find the same thing? Yes, he did. So for this one, I'd probably say the contemporary study does not change our understanding of the key theme. Or you could say it only changes our understanding of the key theme to some extent. And the reason for that is because the contemporary study of Bocchiaro found that people were still obedient to an authority figure, and they were still obedient 50 years later, because this study was 50 years later. 50 years later, even though the authority figure wasn't even in the room this time, people were still obedient compared to, and then obviously you have to give some sort of evidence. So for example, I think it was 76.5% of people were still obedient compared to Milgram's study, where they were obedient when the authority figure was in the room, and they found that 65% of people went all the way to 300 volts. To 450 volts. I'm making so many mistakes here, guys. So based on what I've just said, you can obviously rewind me and play that again, but I want you to have a go at writing that in your booklet. So, does the contemporary study change our understanding of the key theme? What do you think? Do you think it doesn't come at all, or do you think it does to some extent? Tell me why, give me evidence. Tell me why, give me evidence. So do pause, rewind me if you want to listen to that again, and pop that down in your booklets. And then the next thing we go through is, how does the study, the contemporary study, change our understanding of social, individual or cultural diversity? So do have a read through this in your booklets. For individual, Milgram led to an understanding of terrible historical events such as the Holocaust and things like that, and how individuals may be led to behave in ways that they would never predict that they would act like that. This has led us to the idea that individuals are susceptible, and actually, if they're asked by a figure in authority, to gradually carry out terrible acts. And Bocchiaro found very similar results in regards to individual diversity. When it comes to social diversity, they both found that actually obedience, to an authority figure is very high. So those societal figures, authority figures, can abuse their positions. Bocchiaro used students, so for him, in a social aspect, if you think about occupation, for example, he found that students were very obedient as well. So it's not just a general public, but students in particular who you wouldn't expect to do everything that they've been told, because obviously they're educated, are still ones to obey as well. And then on a cultural level, Bocchiaro did his in, was it Amsterdam, I think, whereas Milgram did his in the US. And what he found was that actually it was the exact same results again. So culturally, it seems that people are obedient across cultures as well. So have a read through that individual, social and cultural diversity in your workbooks, and then we move on to the assumptions of the social approach. So in your booklets, it mentions that there are some defining principles and concepts of the social area. Now, some of these defining principles or assumptions of the social area, so what social psychologists believe about behaviour, include things like the approach suggests that all human behaviour occurs in a social context. This means that even in the absence of others, the actual implied or perceived presence of others affect our behaviour. Behaviour is influenced by people, the environment and the situation. So what this basically means is that even if we've got somebody there, or if they're not there physically present, we're still going to act in a way that's deemed appropriate by that social context. So if you imagine yourself in church, for example, when the church minister is there, or the pastor or whoever, you are going to act in a certain way that requires you to act the way that you act in a church. If the pastor leaves the room, you're not going to start dancing and singing on the church chairs. You're still going to be acting a way that kind of is required by that social context. Another assumption is that other people in the environment influence our behaviour and thought processes, and our relationships with others influence our behaviour and thought processes as well. So we've got people, and our relationships with other people affect us. So if you think about it, you may speak differently to your friends than the way that you speak to your grandmother or your mother. So I just need to pause this 1 second. Sorry about that. So the last assumption is the approach tends to use observational methods to study interactions between people in real life, or controlled laboratory settings, or controlled lab settings, or controlled observations. So Milgram and Bocchiaro both controlled observations in lab settings, and that's what the social approach tends to use. So in your booklet, it says, give some examples to illustrate each of the defining principles of the social area. And you can see in your booklet, it says, in the 4 boxes in your booklet, it says 3 on one page and 1 on the next page. Other people and the environment influence our behaviour and thought processes. Is there any examples where that's happened to you, where other people and the environment actually influence our behaviour? Situations we are in influence our behaviour as well. So acting in a way that is deemed acceptable by society. So it may be that there's a certain situation that may affect the way that we're acting. All human behaviour occurs in a social context. So even when no one else is present, I'll give you an example for that one. So the example about church. And our relationships with others influence our behaviour and thought process as well. And I've given you an example for that when I've talked about the way you speak to your friends compared to the way that you speak to your grandmother. So have a go at writing those. Do pause the video, have a go at writing those, and then we'll move on to this next section. So the next section, I have not actually written out what it is or how each of the studies links to the social area. You guys know exactly what it is you need to do in order to answer a question like that. So I'm just going to insert a slide and remind you, so a reminder for how to answer a question that asks you to link a study to an approach. Okay, so linking a study to an approach. So first of all, you need to outline an assumption. Then tell me how it links. Tell me how it links to the assumption. So the study, of course, how the study links to the assumption. Make sure you've got evidence. So some result to back up what you're saying. Okay, so if we were to do Milgram together, let's do it together. Make sure you write this in your booklet. It says task, pick out which of the studies link with the assumptions of the social approach. It says the classical study is, and then it's got a space. So this classical study is Milgram. Now the one in your booklet is a 5 marker, which means if it's a 5 marker, you need 2 links. If it's a 3 marker, you only need 1 link. So for Milgram, we say one assumption of the social approach. So follow along and write this in your booklet. Is that all behaviour occurs in a social context, even when others are not present. Okay, so you can put that as your assumption. Or actually, I think I'm going to leave that one out because that is a better assumption to use for Bocchiaro. And the reason I'm saying that is because for Bocchiaro, the experimenter wasn't in the room. So sorry if you've written that down. For Bocchiaro, the authority figure wasn't in the room. So you can use that one for Bocchiaro. If you were to answer how Bocchiaro links to the social approach, you can talk about how people were still obedient, even though the authority figure wasn't actually in the room. For Milgram, what I'm going to use is one assumption of the social approach is that other people and the environment influence our behaviour and thought processes. Milgram's study links to this as he looked at how an experimenter in a white coat posing as an authority figure influenced decisions made by the participants. He found, sorry about the typo, that 65% of participants went up to 450 volts on the shock generator, showing that other people can influence our behaviour to a large extent. Now that's only 3 marks worth. If it's 5 marks like it is in your booklet, you need another assumption. So another assumption of the social approach is that the environment or social context we are in will influence our behaviour. For example, Milgram links to this as he found that being in a prestigious, I don't know if you remember that, he was in a prestigious setting in Yale University, meant that participants would follow the authority figure's orders more than if in a different setting. Evidence for this is from when Milgram recreated, I don't know if you remember this, guys, but recreated the study in a rundown office block and found that obedience levels differed greatly. Okay, so that's your 5 marker. If you were to do that for Bocchiaro, you would have to find 2 assumptions to link to Bocchiaro's study. So I want you to have a go at doing it for Bocchiaro, and I want you to fill in the 5 marker for Bocchiaro. So you can use, like I said, the assumption of that all behaviour happens in a social context, and that it is only the actual implied or perceived presence of others that may still affect us. And then you could say how Bocchiaro left them to their own devices, but the implied presence of the authority figure was still there. So it seems as though, it could still affect us when people aren't even there either, and then give some evidence to support that. And then your second one that you could link it to again could be about the fact that they were in a university, so the same one that I did for Milgram for the second one. But yeah, do pause and have a go at it, and then we'll go through the evaluation together as well. So do pause. Okay, so for the strengths and weaknesses of the social approach, one of the weaknesses, and again you need to copy this into your booklets, is that the social area of psychology is reductionist. This is a weakness as it doesn't take into account any other explanations for behaviour, such as the idea that participants' behaviour may be down to them being naturally obedient rather than the effects of the authority figure. And then the example is, for example, the social approach would explain Milgram's results as being down to the authority figure that was present and the environment that participants were in, rather than their natural behaviour. We've also got, so the strengths is that the social area is useful. Just like everything else in psychology is useful, the social area is also useful. And this is because it helps us understand how social situations can affect a person's behaviour to such an extent that they may hurt people. For example, Milgram's study found that people were going to administer a fatal shock of 450 volts just because an experiment in a white coat told them so. So this is useful as it means we can train authority to not abuse their positions. Another strength of the social approach is that it has face validity. Now, this is a bit of a weird one for you guys, but face validity, if you remember, is if on the face of it, it seems like it's a valid measure, then it has face validity. So the social approach has face validity in that social explanations offered for behaviour seem to make sense. This is because as humans, we are social people, social animals, therefore it makes sense that we learn from other people. For example, Milgram demonstrated that people will follow instructions from a legitimate authority figure, and this means this seems to actually make sense because social structures exist in society, and therefore those of lower status must follow the instructions of those of higher status in society to keep society going. On the other hand, one of the weaknesses is that it may seem deterministic. Now, if you remember, determinism means that something outside of our control, outside of ourselves, is controlling our behaviour. So it's deterministic because it suggests that social situations and other people in them cause an individual's behaviour. This actually ignores free will and suggests that therefore individuals don't choose how to behave and therefore cannot be held responsible. For example, the social approach would suggest that criminal behaviour is determined by associating with the wrong crowd, which takes away the individual's culpability for committing the crime. You could also put something about Bocchiaro and that the fact that they didn't choose to let the study go ahead, but it was the authority figure that controlled their behaviour. This takes away all responsibility from them for the action. So they could say, oh, well, it wasn't me, I wouldn't have done it if I had a choice, but I didn't have a choice. So, it's deterministic, saying that people are literally controlling your behaviour. Authority figures members are controlling your behaviour. That's it for that one. So what I'd like you to do is make sure you've got all of your booklet filled out. Like I said, if you've got any questions at all, or if you want me to check up on anything, please do pop onto Google me and we can have a chat then. But for now, that is the end. Okay, guys? Bye-bye.